Greetings. I'm Jeff Sachs. I'm a director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University and president of the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network. That's a global network for global problem solving. So it won't surprise you, I think, to learn that I believe that global institutions, including networks of universities in the case that I'm engaged in, but especially the United Nations, is absolutely vital for our well-being in the 21st century. And in that context, the idea that nationalisms of the kind promoted by Trump with America First or any such naive ideas could possibly be fruitful for us, I would reject. I think the idea that each country puts itself first and withdraws from international engagements in the UN, as Trump does, withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement, withdrawing from the World Health Organization, withdrawing from UNESCO, withdrawing from the Human Rights Council, withdrawing from the UN Security Council agreements on Iran. All of those actions by the Trump administration are stupid, reckless, dangerous, and absolutely harmful to America's own interest and to the global interest, because America's interest cannot be served by a nationalistic, xenophobic, actually hate-filled vision of the rest of the world. Least of all could it be served by the kind of new Cold War that Trump is proposing against China. Well, God help us, we won't have to deal with Trump after the November 3rd election. The man is a nightmare and is, in Greek political thought, a tyrant that is overseeing an oligarchy. And this is a huge problem for the United States. Our democracy has diminished tremendously in the last generation. We are no paragon of democratic virtues whatsoever, but thank God we hold on to some of the key institutions, including the vote on November 3, and that's the best time to get rid of a would-be tyrant and to say no to a would-be oligarchy. But my topic is global institutions. And there I would like to emphasize that what we want from our social, economic, and political life in an interconnected world can only be achieved by global cooperation underpinned by global institutions. Without that, it can descend to war of all against all. We don't want more war because in our time, war could end all. And without question, it creates mass suffering. Now, we're at the Athens Democracy Forum, and Athens as the birthplace of democracy. The great Athenian philosophers, Plato and Aristotle, said that the goal of politics is well-being of the citizens, as Plato said in the Republic, and as Aristotle wrote in the Politics. The goal in Greek terms is eudaimonia, and we are after the well-being in the 21st century. But what constitutes well-being in the 21st century? I would say four critical items. First is environmental safety, which we no longer have because we're in the midst of environmental catastrophes, including emerging diseases like COVID-19, climate change, destruction of biodiversity, and massive pollution. The second is a society that functions as a society rather than at each other's throats, like we are inside the United States right now. And that requires a strong middle class, and a measure of social equality, social inclusion, social trust. But when inequality of wealth and income becomes so phenomenally large as it is inside the United States now, that social trust breaks down, understandably so. The third area we want is prosperity. That is enabled by technologies such as the one that we're engaged in right now, the digital technology that is allowing so much of the world's economy to function efficiently online. But technology also requires a framework, a law-based framework, because otherwise the digital technologies could become our enemies for surveillance, loss of privacy, fake news, cyber warfare, and so many other ills. So one needs a framework for technology to enable prosperity. And the fourth thing that we want is peace. And especially in the nuclear age, we depend on peace for the survival of the human race. And as President John F. Kennedy put it, to express succinctly the reality of the nuclear age, when he spoke in his inaugural address in January 1961, he said, "For the time is very different now. Mankind holds in his mortal hands the ability to end all forms of human poverty and all forms of human life." In other words, we have the technologies to end poverty, but that technological prowess, so to speak, also makes it possible that we end all human life. We need these four dimensions of our life to work for our eudaimonia, for our well-being. We need environmental sustainability. We need social inclusion. We need technology that is properly harnessed, and we need peace. But how are we going to achieve those four objectives in our global society in an interconnected world? Not a single one of them can be achieved other than through international cooperation. Consider the environment. Each country does not make its own environment. The environment that each of us has is the product of the actions of all nations. That's why we need a global agreement to stop human-induced climate change. That's why Trump is such an idiot for pulling the United States out of the Paris Climate Agreement when all other 192 countries of the United Nations are inside. He's something between an ignoramus and a psychopath, to use another good Greek term. And the fact of the matter is, he says it's unfair to the United States. That's a treaty that is universal for all countries. It's not unfair to anybody because it's not targeted at any single country. It is universal in nature. We need global cooperation to stop pandemics. Trump doesn't get it to this day. That's why we have more than 200,000 dead in the United States. We need global surveillance systems, global control systems, global information, not the kind of disinformation and anti-science that Trump's cronies deliver every day. You can't achieve that without global cooperation. We need the World Health Organization. For social inclusion, we need budgets. We need to be able to collect taxes. But in a world of tax fraud, like the president himself, tax evasion, tax havens, unless we have global cooperation on taxation and finance, no single economy can function. And of course, we need rules of trade, another basic idea that Trump and his cronies have forgotten in their efforts to bust the World Trade Organization. When it comes to technology, well, Trump again is trying to play it as a loner, saying we won't deal with China on this, we'll just stop all technology flows to China. Give me a break. China is technologically sophisticated. It will be able to compete in technologies, but if we're going to use the digital technologies effectively, we need to have rules of the road about privacy, about data management, about surveillance. And that's what a treaty and a framework and a monitoring system would be about. Again, because we have such a simple-minded president and such a crooked government, we don't think in terms of cooperation on this. The president seems to spend half his time on what's going to happen to TikTok right now. And the Secretary of State spends most of his time telling other countries not to buy Huawei equipment based on either incredible naivete or just sheer brazenness that since the US doesn't produce low-cost 5G equipment, no one is going to be allowed to buy China's low-cost 5G equipment. All the rest is bunkum, just hype on all of the charges that are made by a group that never tells the truth in my country, unfortunately. And if we're going to have peace, we need the UN framework. That's why the UN was created in the first place. It was created to stop war. After the failure of the Treaty of Versailles following World War I to prevent the onset of World War II. Franklin Roosevelt, our greatest president in the United States, had the inspiring vision that we would make global cooperation work after World War II in a way that it did not work after World War I, when the United States did not participate in the League of Nations, the very institution that Woodrow Wilson had helped to create in the aftermath of World War I. But then, of course, the US Senate refused to ratify the treaty and refused to enter the League of Nations. It was crippled from the start. And Franklin Roosevelt said that this time we would have institutions that would have the strength to prevent future conflicts and to prevent the occurrence of economic and social disasters that brought on conflict, and thus the creation of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank at the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944. Those were days when the United States led. We are now 75 years after the creation of the UN, and we find ourselves in a profound crisis. I think the biggest source of this crisis, beyond all others, is that the United States, still the largest economy in the world, measured at market prices, still by far the largest military force in the world, the country with more than 6,000 nuclear warheads, compared to a few hundred, for example, in China, a country with military bases around the world, an estimated 800 overseas bases in about 80 countries, a country whose currency, the US dollar, is still the basis of payments and settlements for more than half the world's transactions. We're in crisis because that country has stopped global cooperation and even effectively gone to open hostility vis-a-vis the UN institutions and the very agencies that the UN itself created. And in this simple-mindedness of this attack on these institutions, the US is walking out. In many cases, China is walking in with very strong candidates to lead these institutions. And then the United States says, oh my God, we're losing influence. We need to get out of the UN because of actions precipitated by the United States turning its back on these institutions in the first place. the sum of all of this is we need a change of direction to understand first that 75 years in, the UN has been successful at its core in forestalling, God forbid, a third world war. And for that reason alone, we need to put all our efforts into the continued success of the UN. But I think beyond that most basic point, the UN structures are absolutely essential, as I've indicated, for what makes for a thriving society, for eudaimonia. So I am counting, hoping fervently for Donald Trump to be roundly defeated on November 3, and for President Biden to reestablish U.S. support for multilateralism, to defuse this attempt at a new Cold War, and to bring nations together as best the U.S. can, but now not as leader, but as partner and cooperator with the rest of the world, to strengthen all of the pillars of the UN system. We need, first of all, to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement. We need to have a successful conference on the conservation of biological diversity at the meeting of the Convention on Biodiversity that will take place in 2021 in China. This is central for our recovery from COVID, and it's central for our future that we get some control over climate change and over the loss of biodiversity. And it's absolutely notable in this regard that Europe has adopted the European Green Deal. And at the UN General Assembly last week, President Xi Jinping announced China's commitment to decarbonizing China's economy by the year 2060. So the US needs to join Europe and China and many other countries in a strong, clear national goal under the umbrella of a global agreement on stopping human-induced climate change and on stopping human-induced loss of biodiversity. We need to bolster the international financial system and the international tax system, both so that the Trumps pay their taxes, but more generally so that countries can finance the universal access to social services that are so central for our children and our future. Access to healthcare, access to education, access to safe water and sanitation, access to renewable energy services for every person in the world, as called for in the Sustainable Development Goals. We need to understand, as I've said, that in a digital age, we need new digital rules of cooperation. Here again, Europe has led with its new rules on data privacy. Europe has shown a way forward. Now we need global cooperation with China, with Korea, with the European Union, with ASEAN, with the other parts of the world on proper management of data to ensure privacy, to ensure safe deployment and beneficial deployment of artificial intelligence systems, to prevent the potential disasters of cyber warfare. And this is a matter of cooperation under the umbrella of the UN. And again, the Secretary General of the UN, in a roadmap issued just recently, called for universal access to digital technologies in a context of human rights and a context of preventing the misuse of these technologies. And finally, we need to rededicate to the UN Security Council, because this is the body that is the legal authority for managing the peace, not the US as a unilateral actor going to war when it wants, creating disasters and instability, but the UN Security Council agreeing together. Just recently, 14 of the 15 members of the UN Security Council said to the United States, no, we are not going to renege on the Iran peace agreement. We mean to find peace. And the United States needs to find the way to listen again to the Security Council, because this is the way to solve problems peacefully and collegially and with the global understanding rather than unilateral imposition of power. We're going to need to reform all of these institutions in the years ahead. After 75 years, there are changes that are needed. The UN Security Council needs to be restructured to reflect more the realities of today's world, which looked very different from 1945. But the underlying value of the UN Security Council and the UN Charter should not be doubted. They should be reinforced in our time. So I want to say thank you for the chance to share these thoughts. Global institutions have the most central purpose of the modern world. They are the institutions that can ensure our survival and that can promote our well-being, our eudaimonia. Thank you very much. Wonderful to be with the Athens Democracy Forum.